Let's go back to a time when fun didn't come with an app and you didn't need Wi-Fi to have a good time. Life back then was all about getting outside and making your own adventure. No screens, no swiping, just hopscotch, conquer battles, and football in the street until the streetlights came on. And guess what? That was just the norm. Now, picture this. It's the 70s, and the idea of a family night means gathering around a board game, not a tablet. After school didn't mean getting picked up in your parents' Tesla, but racing home on your trusty rally chopper. And fashion? Let's just say platform shoes and flared trousers were a statement all on their own. So, are you ready to see how people lived without all the gadgets? Spoiler alert, they were having the time of their lives. Let's see what Richie has in store for us today. The 1970s, a decade that seems a world away from today. No smartphones, no internet, no endless doom scrolling on social media. Life was different, simpler, some might say. And while every generation has its charm, there's something about growing up in the 60s and 70s that feels especially magical now. A time when the biggest distraction was figuring out who had the best conkers, not which app had the latest update. Back then, kids didn't need a digital device to fill their days. Nope, we had something far better. The great outdoors. Playgrounds were like our very own little adventure parks. Swings that soared to impossible heights. The roundabout that spun you so fast, you felt like you were training for a space mission. And those impossibly high slides that seemed to be designed to challenge both your courage and your balance. Safety regulations? Who needs them? Playing outdoors wasn't a chore, it was a freedom. Football in the street was a daily occurrence, and a good game of cricket could be set up with nothing more than a dustbin lid for stumps. And let's not forget about rounders, hopscotch, and the legendary Knock Knock Ginger. That's right, Knock Knock Ginger wasn't just some myth, it was a staple of childhood rebellion. You knocked, you ran, and for a few moments, you were the sneakiest kid in the world. It didn't take long to figure out which neighbors had a sense of humor and which ones would chase you down the road. And then there were the conker fights. Some kids had a secret formula for making their conkers invincible, baked in the oven or soaked in vinegar overnight. There was a real art to threading that string through the conker and smashing your mate's prize nut to pieces. Simple, but satisfying. Before we move forward, if you're enjoying this trip down memory lane with Richie, then please give us a like and subscribe. Okay, let's keep going. Getting to school wasn't a case of hopping into the back of a massive 4x4 with air conditioning and seat warmers. Oh no, it was bikes, buses, or your own two legs. The rally chopper, now that was the ride to have. Those high handlebars and long seat, it was the ultimate in school cool. And if you were lucky enough to graduate to the rally grifter, you were practically royalty. Walking or biking gave you something precious. Freedom. Sure, there were no mobile phones to check in every 10 minutes, but that was part of the charm. You made plans and stuck to them. No need for a WhatsApp group to figure out where everyone was. If they weren't at school or home, they'd be down the park, or you could hear them kicking a football a few streets away. And when we weren't outside, we didn't have Netflix or YouTube to while away the hours. Instead, we gathered around board games. Monopoly, a game that seemed to last forever and inevitably ended with someone flipping the board out of sheer frustration. Snakes and ladders were for those less competitive moments, though Mousetrap was a fan favorite purely for the intricate contraption at the end, even if the actual game was secondary. Kaplunk, with its satisfying clatter of marbles, was another household staple. Board games brought families together in a way that feels lost now. They were a bonding experience, a moment to laugh, to argue, and to celebrate small victories. One thing that united us all in the 70s was community. Take the Queen's Silver Jubilee in 1977, for example. What a time! The streets were decked out in flags and bunting, with everyone pitching in to organize a party. Long trestle tables filled with sandwiches, cakes, and jellies stretched as far as the eye could see. Kids running up and down with sticky fingers, while parents sipped tea and caught up with the neighbors. The street wasn't just where you lived, it was where you lived together. It's hard to explain a sense of community to anyone who didn't experience it. Today, we live behind closed doors. but back then, your neighbors knew your business, and it wasn't a bad thing. It meant that when times were tough, you had people to lean on, and times back then were tough. In 1974, the UK experienced the famous 3-day week. Electricity was rationed due to strikes, meaning power cuts were a regular feature of life. Can you imagine today's kids handling that? No lights, no TV, no electric oven, just candlelight, board games, and maybe some huddling around a transistor radio if you were lucky enough to have batteries. But somehow, we made do. It was far from ideal, but it was memorable. A reminder that even in difficult times, we could make our own fun. Then there was the music. The soundtrack to those simpler days wasn't just about listening, it was about living it. Glam rock was huge. T-Rex, Slade, Sweet, Shawaddy Waddy, bands that weren't just playing music, they were creating anthems for a generation. The loud outfits, the platform shoes, and those massive collars. Oh yes, fashion was bold, and that's putting it lightly. Bell bottoms and flared trousers were the standard, and if you didn't have a shirt with a collar wide enough to take flight in a strong wind, you were doing something wrong. Platform shoes added a good few inches to your height, but they were treacherous on anything other than smooth, flat ground. Speaking of bold, the 70s gave us some of the most unforgettable moments in sports history. Boxing, for example, was at its peak with 2 matches that defined the sport for decades to come. First, the Rumble in the Jungle, Muhammad Ali versus George Foreman in 1974. Ali was considered past his prime, but in that fight, he showed the world he wasn't done yet, using the now famous rope-a-dope strategy to wear Foreman down before knocking him out. The fight was legendary and is still talked about as one of the greatest sports events of all time. Then, just a year later, we had the thriller in Manila, Ali versus Joe Frazier for the 3rd and final time. It was a brutal, relentless fight. Both men left everything in the ring, but Ali emerged victorious. To this day, it remains one of the greatest rivalries in boxing. In 1972, Great Britain made history in another sport, rugby, led by Clive Sullivan. The national team won the Rugby League World Cup. Sullivan became the first black captain of any British national sporting team, a significant milestone at the time, and an enduring legacy for rugby fans. The 70s also gave us another British sporting hero, Virginia Wade, who won Wimbledon in 1977, the same year as the Queen's Jubilee. Her victory was like the cherry on top of an already patriotic cake. As the last British woman to win Wimbledon, her triumph still holds a special place in British tennis history. As much as the 70s were filled with joy and play, the world was changing. The Vietnam War was still raging across the globe, and in 1979, Britain witnessed a political milestone, with Margaret Thatcher becoming the country's first female prime minister. Love her or hate her, Thatcher's rise to power marked the beginning of a new political era in the UK. But back in our homes, the headlines didn't dominate our days the way they do now. Sure, we watched the news, though sometimes it felt like it was more for the adults. But the beauty of the time was that the world outside didn't intrude quite as much on the simplicity of childhood. What made the 70s most memorable wasn't the absence of technology, it was about the abundance of connection. We weren't glued to screens, we were glued to each other. The simple pleasures of life, playing outside, gathering for board games, street parties, and listening to music were what kept us entertained. It's funny when you look back. Sure, we didn't have smartphones or the internet, but we had the richness of experience that's hard to replicate today. There was something magical about living in a world where you couldn't be distracted by notifications every 5 minutes, where you knew everyone on your street, and where the biggest challenge was figuring out who had the best conker, or how to survive a Monopoly marathon without losing your cool. The 70s may be long gone, but the memories are as vibrant as ever. Simpler times, perhaps, but they were the good times. I hope you've enjoyed this trip down memory lane with Richie. What was your favourite part of the 70s? Were you a big Muhammad Ali fan? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please share them in the comments below. Don't forget to check out another nostalgia-themed video on my channel, and remember to subscribe for more British nostalgia. Thanks for watching.